So we've made it onto project 5, and in this assignment you're going to be choosing something around your house that's pretty mundane, and you're going to be elevating that object because you're going to be staring at it and looking at the minute details of it to find all of the things that you can use to sculpt it. So I've collected a variety of things in front of me that I've found around my house and in my studio space, and I was thinking that these could be really interesting to sculpt. There's a couple of them that might not work out so well, like the hat that I found. I really like the bow that's happening, and the texture is really interesting too, but it's really big, and I don't think I'm gonna have enough clay to make something this big. But hats are really interesting. You could do like maybe a baseball cap. I also have this bag that I found, and I really also like the texture, and I like how it's fabric, and I was really interested in sculpting the fabric, and even having the zippers, they make a really interesting pattern, and I could get really intricate and detailed with sculpting the zipper pattern. And I found a seashell, a paint can with a paintbrush, a coffee mug, some staples and a stapler, some safety glasses, and a mask that I have used every day. And so when you're looking at the items that you're wanting to choose something that has a variety of different kinds of shapes. So just doing the paintbrush by itself might be a little too simple. So you can take the paintbrush and put it in a paint can, and that's something that's a little bit more, it has more essence to it, and because it has textures with the paint can. And I can either choose to sculpt these separate, or I can choose to sculpt them together. Instead of just doing a stapler, I can do a stapler with the staples. And because the stapler itself has a really interesting pattern to it, or shape to it. And but it's kind of simple, it's kind of small, so it can add it with the staples. And just having the staple box closed and as a regular box wouldn't be that interesting. But I can open the stapler box up, and I can stack up the staples in such a way, and I can sculpt it like this. And you want to start thinking about how small things are, because staples can be super small, and expecting to sculpt those out of clay can be really hard. So you can stack them up all on top of each other, and it'll be a lot easier rather than having tiny pieces of clay that can break. So one of the objectives of this assignment is to sculpt something so that it fools the viewer. With the bag, I would sculpt even the textures and the patterns in it, so that the viewer actually thinks that it's real. Now, we're not going to be able to do any coloring on it or any glazing on it, so just try to make it real enough with the clay that you have. With the mask and with the safety glasses, I wouldn't want to just sculpt the mask by itself because it's kind of simple, but I could sculpt the mask and the safety glasses together as a unit. And things that are really small, like the elastic on the mask or the strap on the bag, they'll be really hard to make if you have bits of clay. So rather than doing that, you can sculpt the elastic onto the mask itself, and then carve away that line rather than having a small piece of coiled clay that's sticking out, because that will definitely break if it's a small coil that's sticking out of a piece of clay. And just like I said with the bag, it's nice to take note of all the little things that are happening in the piece. So the way the clay folds, or the way the mask folds, and the textures that are around it too. And with something like this, it's got a really interesting shape that I like about it, and I could make something that looks exactly like this. But take into account, like even this tiny little screw here, I would want to sculpt that screw onto my sculpture. And this even comes apart, so you can make your clay pieces come apart and attach together if you wanted to make something like that. These are all just suggestions of ideas you can make. One of the important things is to make something that has really interesting shapes to it, because we're going to be working on these for 2 weeks. You wouldn't want to make something as simple as this cup, because then you're going to be finished with it really fast, and then what else is there to do with it? Well, what you could do is put your tools inside of it, and or maybe utensils, maybe it's dish tools or cutlery or silverware that you have inside of there, and then you can sculpt all of these things and have a cup full of tools. So try to pick things that have some interesting shapes to them, are not so simple, but also not too complex. Like my hat is too big, so I can't use that. So I'm actually gonna sculpt this seashell because I really like the shapes that are happening here, and the points are really interesting too. And what is really important is that whatever object you choose, you can have sitting in front of you, and you can look at all of the details of that object, and you can pick it up and you can move it around because you'll be sculpting all the parts. Even this thing, I don't want to just have it flat on the bottom. This actually has some stuff going on the bottom, so I would want to sculpt that onto the piece. Even this has an interesting bottom. It's not just flat. It has the same textures throughout the whole entire thing. And this as well has an interesting bottom to it. This is a really interesting shape, and it is clear, so when you sculpt yours won't be clear, but it still will have an interesting shape to it. And also, if you do things that have words on it, rather than just taking your pen tool and carving in the words, try to think of something more dynamic. Like you can take your loop tools and you can carve away the words so that it's a relief going up or a relief going into the clay. Because just drawing words with the pen tool is kind of not dynamic enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my area ready to start sculpting, and I'll show you how to sculpt this object solid. So stay tuned for that. Hey, I'm back, and I've put all of my objects away, but I've just kept out my seashell that I am going to be sculpting. So I want to keep that with me at all times while I sculpt. And I have actually collected the rest of the clay that I have from my bag. And it's okay that this is the rest of the clay that I have. I don't need to keep any extra because I'm actually going to scoop out the insides of this clay, and then I'll be able to use those inside clay bits later. I'll be able to wedge them all up and then use them later. So this is actually a pretty relatively good size of clay for the mass of the seashell. I'm kind of eyeballing the two of them, and I'm thinking that, yeah, this clay ball looks like it might be a little bit too big, but it's always better to make something a little bit too big than it is to make it too small, especially with clay, because clay will shrink. And if I make a clay seashell that is the exact same size as this in the plastic form of clay, what's going to happen is when it's fired, it's actually going to be about an inch or two smaller than the actual object. So when I sculpt something, I'm going to sculpt it just a little bit bigger than what it actually is. So I have my piece of clay here, and it's solid. I've wedged it up. I'm getting out any of the little dry bits that are in it, and I'm actually going to start patting it together. I'm going to start just looking at the shape of this. I have this close next to me, and I'm just going to start patting out where I think it needs to be longer, and then squeezing where I think it needs to be shorter. So you're basically like sculpting the piece from where it needs to be. If you have a wooden kitchen spoon around, you can use that as a paddle to help you shape. I happen to have at the studio a mallet, so I'm going to use that for a little bit. Actually, no, I can use this. That can help me shape it. So this is your rolling pin. And I'm not just taking it and smacking it in, I'm actually taking it and like going at an angle and pushing the clay up. Very lightly taps. It might be better if you have a wooden spoon though. Wooden spoons will help a lot. So see, I'm getting the basic shape of it, so I have the top part, but the bottom part isn't quite there yet. So I can take a tool and I can start paddling it. You can also use your hands too, but it might take a little bit longer. But see, now it's starting to shape itself into that general shape. And it really just depends on what you're sculpting. If you're sculpting that has multiple parts to it, you, like say for instance, the stapler and the box, you would want to sculpt those separately, right? Okay, so I'm gonna keep working on this a little bit more, doing the same exact type of thing that I was just doing, and I will get right back to you. Okay, so I've sculpted out the basic shape of my form, and I paddled it out, and I started to press my fingers into one side. So I was looking at my form and I started thinking, oh, now where is this opening going to go? Where is this part gonna happen? So I started pressing my thumbs into the clay, and I started making this opening occur. And I used actually my fingers, and I started pinching into the clay to start to, and I pinched deeper and deeper, and now I have that opening that the seashell has, and it's going in the same direction. So that's all I really want to do. I don't really want to get any more detailed than that, because I'm gonna cut this in half, and I am going to scoop out the interior of the clay that's on the inside. So that is it for this demonstration. What you'll do is you can let these parts set up until the next day, or if you wanted to, you can go ahead and cut it in half and scoop it out. It might be better to let it set up for a day so that it doesn't kind of move everywhere, but if you just don't have the time, you can cut it open the same day. So in my next video, I will be cutting this open and scooping it out, so stay tuned for that.